having that sort of innovation platform at the core, around that surrounding are these really rich instructional strategies that go from rapid cycle feedback, and we know that good quality feedback is close to real time, can be a learning accelerator. In fact, the research for that goes back to Black and Williams in the late 1990s. We found that if we infuse student voice, and I've really talked about that through this whole presentation, this idea that not that the classroom is taken over by the learner, but that the learner's concern and perspective is taken into account when we make instructional decisions, when we make environmental decisions within the classroom. The idea of customized responsive instruction, that we gear our instruction to what students are ready to learn, rather than what's the next thing in my lesson plan book, or what did I teach next last year, or even for that matter, what's the next topic in the curriculum. That we focus more on the learner and less on the outside structure. And you can see the rest of those, certainly thinking about assessment in more robust ways, and focusing increasingly on assessment as learning in addition to assessment for and of learning. And again, we can come back and talk about these in greater detail if you'd like to. So that's sort of the instructional strategy piece. Now around that, what we found is this sort of the idea of shifting relationships and roles. And I'll tell you when we started this, it was interesting. And this was, I mean, there's the work from 2-3 years ago was about how this work really does change the role of the learner, of the teacher, and that is absolutely true. It's an oversimplification to say, you go from stage on the stage to guide on the side. Certainly that's there, but there's a lot more to that change in role from a teacher's perspective. And it is, by the way, in many ways, much more meaningful, much more impactful work. Not less rigorous, not necessarily easier, but it does allow us to get much closer to learners, to understand learners at greater depth, and have more influence with them. What we did not see on the front end was this change in the role of the learner from a more passive role to a much more active. From the sort of compliance to commitment that I talked about earlier. This idea of being a co-designer of their learning, not someone who's sitting back as a receptacle to be filled with the knowledge of the teacher. It's this shift around that really, by the way, we found now accelerates the learning. So you can move the needle on student learning if you just do the 3 core components and the instructional strategies around it. What happens is, as you begin to change the role of learner and teacher, this work really accelerates. And by the way, it becomes really fun. And then around the outside, consistent with the 5-lever conversation we had earlier, are these sort of structural pieces that hold the system in place, that remove barriers and further accelerate the work. So, I mean, that really is the sort of big piece. I will tell you, for people who get in trouble, they tend to start at the outside and move in, as opposed to focusing on those 3 components on the front end. The other magic to this, by the way, is there are many ways you can put this work together. So it's not a recipe. It is not a lockstep process to follow. It really does allow you to understand your context, your capacity, your community, your students, and be able to design a system that is responsive to what it is you're trying to do and that is consistent with your context. So it's not a pre-cooked, canned model that, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. There's a sequence to it, but there's much more interaction. There's more organic nature to this to allow you to create a system that works for you. All right, let's go to the next slide.